Well, good evening. I'm shocked that Dr. Hartzler would let a Texas politician come share with you. I'm actually a recovering politician. Go to a Tuesday night meeting every week. Get up and say, hi, I'm Rick, recovering. I'm now 2 years clean off the ballot, so things are good. My wife is very happy about that, so we're going to try to keep it that way. I'm going to tell you right up front my plan for tonight. My goal tonight is to convince you of America's exceptionalism and then convince you of restoring that exceptionalism is absolutely necessary and is happening because of schools like Timothy. And if you don't do what you are doing, if you don't continue to do this, we will lose America. So a very serious topic for you tonight, and hopefully I'll get both of those points across. Now let me first tell you that I understand exceptionalism is sometimes viewed as being braggadocious, that we're bragging about America. Now look, I'm a Texan. I know a little something about bragging, okay? So we Texans tend to think there are only two kinds of people, Texans and those that want to be Texans. That's it, okay? That's not necessarily true, right? So that's a little bit of bragging. I learned how to brag by another Texan, former president and governor of Texas when I was in the legislature, George W. Bush. And it actually happened when I was doing a documentary on President Reagan, I think the greatest president of the last century. And I was traveling around the country and I was interviewing all these people that had worked with Reagan or served under Reagan, and asking them about what made Reagan special and why he was successful and all those things. And I was actually in D.C. interviewing Dick Cheney. And now Dick Cheney was not vice president yet. This was back, 94, 95. And I didn't know he was going to become vice president. I didn't know he was going to turn into Darth Vader. I didn't know any of those things, which I like Darth Vader and I like Dick Cheney, so that didn't bother me when the media called him that. But anyway, so I'm interviewing Dick Cheney. He's former Secretary of Defense under Bush 41. He had been a congressman during the Reagan tax cuts of 81. And so I'm interviewing Dick Cheney, and I notice he's got this white phone on his desk that has a halo on it. Never seen one of those. So I said, Mr. Secretary, what's with the phone? He said, Rick, that's a direct line to God. I said, I didn't know that existed. Could I use it? He said, yeah, but you got to pay me back. The thing is $500 a minute. Made my call, got back to Texas, paid Dick Cheney for the call, got back to Texas. I'm interviewing our governor at the time, George Bush. He's got a white phone on his desk with a halo on it. I said, Governor, before I leave, can I use the direct line to God? He said, yeah, but you got to pay me back. That thing is $5 a minute. I said, wait, Governor, I was with the Secretary of Defense. I said, man, that's all the states, $500 a minute. You're governor of one state telling me it's only $5. He said, boy, you've forgotten where you are. He said, this is Texas, God's country, local call if you make it right here from Austin, Texas. So, all right, it's only one like that. I'm going to run by you. I'll stop with the Texas stuff. All right, so, actually, wait, let me give you one more with Bush. Okay, so when I got elected to the legislature, it was actually lost on election night by 20 votes out of 30,000. So 20 votes is not, where I live, that's one homeschool family, right? That's not very many back where I live. And so, it was a very close election. So I end up winning by 36 votes after we do a recount. Found some hanging chads, this was 1998, before 2000, the presidential recount in Florida and all that. And so I get this call after the recount, and it's the governor at the time, George Bush. And he says, Rick, he said, that was close. He said, I'm officially dubbing you landslide green. He laughed. He thought that was really funny in 98. Not so funny in 2000, right? He had his own little recount to deal with. All right, so that's all my George Bush stories and jokes. Now let's talk about exceptionalism. Now here's the deal. The thing about saying something is exceptional is my mom always told me that if it's true, it ain't bragging, all right? And so here's the thing about what American exceptionalism actually means. And I'm actually going to replace the word. So instead of exceptionalism, let's use the word extraordinary, because it's a little bit more descriptive in that we are talking about being extraordinary. In other words, not normal, just an exception to the rule, extra, beyond what the rest of the world has ever experienced. So when I say that America is exceptional, that's what I mean. And I have to tell you, if you think I'm bragging, just look, the phrase comes from a Frenchman, okay? So it was actually Alexis de Tocqueville that coined this idea that America is exceptional and that there's something special happening here. If you don't believe that, if you've bought the lie about America's no better than anybody else and our way of life is just the same as anybody else, just look at a couple of basic facts, okay? Just in terms of wealth and prosperity, we're 4% of the nation's population, 30% of the nation's wealth. Now, obviously, some people say, well, that means you're hoarding and that means it's not fair. No, there's something about our formula, the American political system and economic system, that is producing that kind of wealth and producing the kind of ingenuity that happens in America. I didn't even realize Edison was so close, but think about it. If Thomas Edison had been born in, let's say, communist Cuba, would we have the 1,093 patents and inventions that he created? If he had been born in North Korea or grew up in a nation like North Korea, would we enjoy the benefits, all of us, the blessings of his ingenuity and his hard work and his elbow grease that he put in so that he could be blessed? Yes, but so that he could bless the rest of us. There is something special about our system, and a rising tide does lift all boats. It does cause all of us to be blessed. Just take a look at this. Those living below the poverty level in the United States are more likely to have a telephone, television, air conditioner, eat more red meat, all that, than, listen close, not the poorest in Europe. The poorest in America are more likely to have all those things than the middle class in Europe. Jefferson put it this way. He said, the comparison of our governments with those of Europe are like a comparison of heaven and hell. That's a pretty big difference. He's not saying that you and I, not that we're better. It's not that we have better people. It's that our political and economic structures, he said our governments, the way of life, the foundation, the way the system works, that's what produces a better result. You don't become wealthy by accident. You don't become prosperous. You don't become powerful by accident. There's a cause producing that effect. There's a formula that makes that happen. Our free enterprise system in America has produced the most wealthy, most powerful, most free, most benevolent nation in the history of the world. There's something about letting all the people make their own decisions and choose for themselves. That's what creates better price, better quality, better supply, all those things. Now, if you allow some dictator to sit up front and say, I'm smarter than everybody else, I'll decide for you what the features on your car is going to be, what kind of health insurance you're going to have, and all the other things about your life, then no longer will you have that kind of prosperity. In fact, you can take all kinds of examples from history or even right now. You take a look at things that happen in countries like Venezuela, but it doesn't matter if you have a socialist dictator at the top making those decisions or a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. making those decisions. The result will be the same, the milk lines, the bread lines, the shortages, because we took that decision out of the people's hands and the market's hand and put it into some government officials' hands. I know y'all didn't expect to come to an Economics 101 class tonight. Okay, so I'm not going to stay on this for very long, but let me give you one example, hopefully, that will make some sense. Take your telephone, for instance. All right, so here's an example of the difference when we allow the founding formula of the pursuit of happiness found in the Declaration of Independence to actually work versus allowing the government to dictate to us how things work. So you think about how the phone has advanced, but there's two different kinds of phones, right? There's the landline and there's the cell phone. In fact, I had a landline phone when I first got elected. I was setting up my district office back home in the big city of Dripping Springs, which I'm sure everybody here has heard of. And I was sitting there and I was putting things together, and I was young. I was like 26 years old. I didn't want everybody to know that I had no idea what I was doing, and I was young and naive. And so I'm putting everything together, and I hear this guy come in. Well, I'm the new state rep. I'm supposed to be busy, man. I'm supposed to be important. So I grabbed the phone off my desk before he could get through there to where I was. I said, no, I can't see you Thursday. I'm booked. No, I'm booked next Thursday as well. 2 weeks from Thursday. All right, 10 o'clock. I'll see you right here in my office. Put the phone down. This guy's made his way through my office. He's standing right in front of my desk. I said, yes, sir. Can I help you? He said, no, I'm just here to hook up that there phone for you. Might help with that next important call you have. How many of you know when you need to be humbled, God will find a way to humble you, all right? So definitely happened to me. The students in the room are going, hook up the phone? What is he talking about? I don't even plug the phone in. I don't get it. Anyway, so we used to do that, all right? So think about the difference in the technological advances of your landline and your cell phone. Your landline phone, virtually micromanaged by government. I mean, we tell the landline companies where they can go. We make them go places they don't want to go. We tell them what they can charge for their product. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so there's been no innovation in the last 30 years. Call waiting's the last big innovation of the landline phone. Now your cell phone, virtually unregulated. Government stayed out of the way, man. Company comes up with an idea for how that phone's going to work. Great. If the market wants to buy it, we buy it, and then we call it an iPhone. If we don't like it, we call it a BlackBerry, and it goes out of business. But I mean, that's how we let the market decide, not the government. But just think about all those technological advantages. Government has stayed out of the way, and now your phone, you can write on it, you can text on it, you can watch movies on it, you can edit movies on it, you can do all. If you get really desperate, you can make a phone call with it. But I mean, it's amazing what you can do with these phones now. And that's the difference between government controlling it and government being out of the way. Think about your earpiece. I mean, now we got all these cool earpieces. You can be across the room from your phone and still listen to music or make a phone call. Just imagine the difference. If government had said, we're going to micromanage your cell phone the way we micromanage your landline phone, just think of the NASA type technology that your earpiece and your technology that you would enjoy and being able to listen to your phone, the convenience factor would be off the wall. It's easy to tell, right? The difference between government micromanaging and letting the free market flourish. We call it pursuit of happiness. Here's the way Reagan put it. He said, this is the issue. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can manage our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. We know the answer to that. We know that freedom works. The formula of freedom that we've enjoyed produces good results. The problem is we haven't taught that in so long in most of our classrooms across the country that we now have 2 or 3 generations that have gone through an education system that actually believes socialism's better than free enterprise. That actually believes it is better to have no value system, let everybody believe whatever they want to believe, and that somehow that will produce a better result. And we're living with the negative consequences of that. So I want to real quick just take us back to 1776 and the formula that these guys put in place. Now the fellow you're looking at on the screen is named George Mason. He's the father of the Bill of Rights. He did the Virginia Declaration of Rights and became kind of the national evangelist for us having a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. He was one of the guys that framed the Constitution, 55 that did that, but he refused to sign because it did not end slavery and it didn't have the Bill of Rights. And just by the way, just some life advice for you real quick from the Founding Fathers. If you are ever that pale or ever have hair that bad, do not sit for a portrait. It'll be around for 100, 200, 300 years. All right. And by the way, just take a close look at George Mason's mullet. It is now evidence that Billy Ray Cyrus did not invent the mullet. All right, I just want you to pick that up on George Mason there. All right, so here's what Mason told us, though. This is the part I really want you to remember. He said, no free government, nor the blessings of liberty can be preserved by any people, but by a frequent recurrence of fundamental principles. Anybody in here want to live in freedom? 4 of you, that's great. I don't know what the rest of you are drinking at your table, but how many of you want to live in freedom? All right, how many of you want to enjoy the blessings of liberty? I mean, here we have these 2 things that we really, really want to have. He's saying you cannot have it. It will not last if you don't have a frequent recurrence. That means not one time, but frequently coming back and being reminded of the principles and the formula that produced that. So I'm going to give you a quick reminder of that formula and then tell you how Timothy is making this happen for another generation. You go back to these fellows in Independence Hall that gave us the Declaration of Independence, and you think about what they did. They created a formula right there in the heart of the Declaration. I call it the frame of America. It's right there in the second paragraph. It's 56 words that I say makes up the frame of America. And you might have a different picture that maybe you would say depicts freedom or the American value system or your way of life, whatever it is, your family, your school here, your church, whatever you consider to be a depiction of freedom. I want you to imagine that picture of freedom up here in the frame and then know this. If the frame goes, your picture's going with it. If the frame goes, my picture's going with it. That frame, that foundation, that formula is what's making it possible for all the things that we enjoy about living in a free nation. And so we have to know the frame, preserve the frame, and that will make sure that the picture is even possible. 4 real quick things out of the frame. They said we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by not their commissioner, not their state rep, not their governor, certainly not their Supreme Court justice. We're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So 4 very basic principles. First of all, there's truth. The Founding Fathers said there's a right and a wrong, moral absolutes. They didn't say, Newt Gingrich used to say it this way, the founders did not say, being randomly gathered protoplasm, we have gathered for the moment to consider the possibility that if it doesn't offend any particular special interest group, we might try to, and that's not what they said. They said we hold these truths to be self-evident, not even debatable. These are truths, bedrock principles that do not change. There is truth. And we got to start being willing to stand up and say there's truth, and that when you get rid of truth, you will lose freedom. If you don't have morality, if you don't have religion and morality, you can't have liberty. It's absolutely essential. In fact, that's why Washington put it this way. He said, of all the habits and dispositions which lead to political prosperity, in other words, all the pieces of the formula that will produce freedom and prosperity, he said, of all the different things that do that, religion and morality, they're okay. You can have them if you want. No, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Saying you can't have freedom. You can't have political prosperity, not just personal, but political, meaning as a nation, if you don't keep religion and morality there. Because think about it, if you don't have morality, how could you have liberty? If we lose morality completely in our culture, we're not gonna be able to get from here to the car without being murdered or raped or stolen from. We're gonna have a police officer on every corner in every home just to protect us from each other. We have to have morality if we want liberty. See, that's the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. Washington, in fact, goes on to say, in vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism that would work to subvert these great pillars. Now, see, I have friends that say, Rick, I was with you till you started bringing the God thing into it. I'm for freedom, I'm for liberty, but do you have to always talk about God in the Bible? I say, they'll say, I can be a patriot without any of those things. Father of the country said you couldn't. Father of the country said if you get rid of those things, you're also destroying the liberty of the country, and it's because he was watching the French Revolution. And the French were going, okay, look, we like this American ideal of liberty. We want libertas, but the American system said freedom under God, freedom from God, therefore it's lived out respecting the authority of God. The French said, no, we want liberty, but no God. And it led to the guillotine, it led to absolute chaos, it didn't work, and he's watching it happen. He says, well, wait a minute, what's different between the French Revolution and the American Revolution? And the essential element was God being the source of the freedom. He said, you gotta have God in the equation. That's why they talk about it in the Declaration, that's why it's mentioned so many times, that's why our system has worked so incredibly well. You think about how different that picture right there is from every system of government in the world in 1776. I mean, the founders looked around and everywhere in the world, power and freedom, it went from God, but to the king. Then the king gave it to you only as the king or queen saw fit. Our founders said, no, power and freedom comes from God, goes directly to you and to me, and then we give it to government for only one reason, to secure the rights that God gave us. So the whole purpose of government is to protect our liberty, and yet today we see it infringing on us so much. And the reason is because about 40 years ago we said, we like this formula, let's produce great results. Problem is that part at the top. God being in the equation is it's cramping my style. There's some things I want to do that if there's a God, I'm not allowed to do them. If we get God out of the equation, then I get real liberty as it's defined today, to do anything and everything that I want. So, you know what? We'll just tweak the formula a little bit. We'll just take God out, but we the people will still be in charge. We'll still tell government what to do, not the other way around, not knowing that when you change the formula, you get a very different result. So when you transform America's formula, you get a very, very different result. And in fact, we wish that we were still in charge, but folks, this isn't the model of America anymore. In fact, the model of America now is we have one branch of government, 5 lawyers in Washington, D.C., making law for 330 million people, unaccountable, unelected lawyers in Washington, D.C., telling you how you're going to live your life, telling you what the jurisdiction of government is going to be. That's not how the founders designed this thing, but it happened because once you take God out and you lose the morality, we need more government. As Robert Winthrop said, we'll either be ruled by the Bible or the bayonet. You get rid of values, you get rid of truth, government has to become bigger and stronger. The bad news is, the Constitution no longer governs our nation. You say, wait a minute, Rick, I thought you were a teacher on the Constitution. I thought you were all for the Constitution. I even have a bumper sticker that says, annoy a liberal, read the Constitution. Those are all things that I believe, no doubt. But we don't live under the Constitution in America right now. We live under what I call the Courtstitution. And what it means is that no longer does the document set up the rules for our nation. It just depends on what these guys get in their robes and get around the witch's brew, and they throw in a phrase here and a phrase there, and they recreate the law on a regular basis, and it's created instability in our system completely. So I encourage you, study the Constitution. We've got a Constitution course we encourage folks to study so that we can restore it, so that we can bring back the way the system actually works. I'm a little bit of a national evangelist for this thing called Convention of States. It's a tool in Article 5 of the Constitution that the Founding Fathers gave us. In fact, the funny looking dude with the mullet and the white, pale face, he's the one that got up on September 14th at the Constitutional Convention and said, hey, if the feds ever get out of control, you think they're going to put themselves back in the box? No way. We know the nature of man. Once you get power, you don't give it up. So we said we got to have a tool within the Constitution to override the feds, and the states and the people will be able to come in and put them back inside their jurisdiction. I know you don't hear that word jurisdiction very often, but that's what limited government's all about, boundaries for what government can do. So check that out, conventionofstates.com. Let's get God back in the equation and then stop running into this thing where we say we don't want God in the equation. Got to debunk something real quick while I got you, though, because a lot of people say, well, Rick, how could you say you want God in the equation? The founders didn't want that. They're all a bunch of atheists, agnostics, and deists. We had an unchristian beginning in America. Why would we say we want God in the equation today if they didn't want God in the equation today? So let me just give you a couple of minutes on this. I want to fly through a few of the founding fathers. David Barton and I both get accused of talking about 90 words a minute with gust up to about 350. And I've been going really slow up until now. So you guys buckle up. I'm going to fly through a few of these guys real quick, hopefully leave you with a sense at least of the 247 men considered to be the founding fathers. Start with John Adams right here, really the force behind the Declaration. Never would have happened without him. He said the general principles upon which the founders achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. So wait. If we're founded on Christian principles, how is it you fast forward 230, 40 years later and you can't even say the name Jesus Christ at a public school graduation? turn the microphone off on you, withhold your diploma. They told one girl in Colorado, you can't even have your diploma until you issue a public apology for saying the word Jesus at your public school graduation. It's amazing the things that we do to prevent that from even being said. But if we're founded on that, how do you get to where we are? So let me give you a few of these guys. George Washington, obviously, people understand the father of the country, and people say, oh, he wasn't religious at all, and he wasn't a man of faith at all. Yet you read the guys that spent time with him, and General Henry Knox says over and over in his journal how he walked in on General Washington in his tent, accidentally interrupted him. Guess what he was doing? He was praying. Same thing happened in Congress. Secretary Thompson talked about walking in on President Washington, accidentally interrupting him. Guess what he's doing? Praying. It's the same answer every time if the rest of y'all want to get in on the action here. He's praying. You go to Valley Forge right now, big bronze monument of George Washington. What's he doing? Praying. You know, you go to the chapel, stained glass window, it's George Washington praying. You go to the Capitol right now in Washington, D.C., private prayer with the congressman, it's George Washington kneeling in prayer. You see the paintings of Washington kneeling in prayer. I mean, I just think it's amazing that an atheist founding father spent that much time praying. I mean, you know, if we people of faith today would pray half as much as those atheists, the country would probably be a little better off, don't you think? But it's not just Washington. I mean, you can go founder after founder. This fellow here you may not be familiar with, but he's actually one of the most important founders. Wilson signed both the Constitution and the Declaration, one of only 6 guys to do that, and he's the original Supreme Court justice. So Washington names him as one of the 6 guys to serve on the Supreme Court from the beginning. Very important founder. Here's what he told us about actually our law and Christianity. He said, human law must rest. Oh, by the way, he spoke more than everybody except Gouverneur Morris at the convention. So he influenced the Constitution more than anybody else than Gouverneur Morris. He spoke 168 times, Morris spoke 173, but major influence on America's founding. Here's what he said. Human law, so that's our civil law, right? That's our criminal law, that's our civil law, that's what our legislators pass, what our city councilmen do, it's what our federal Congress, all the laws you can think of, that human law, he said, must rest its authority ultimately upon that law which is divine. He said, far from being rivals or enemies, religion and law are twin sisters, friends, mutual assistance. Indeed, these two sciences run into each other, meaning they're working together, pulling to give us a good culture and a good society. Today, they run into each other like a couple of Mack trucks having a head-on collision. We actually don't allow any reference to religion or the Bible in a courtroom or in a jury discussion or in our classrooms in the public schools. All that. We've totally changed what these guys told us we should never actually do. Maybe you recognize the fellows in the painting here. This is, of course, the 56 atheists that signed the Declaration of Independence. If you believe the major media. They're not just atheists, though. They're enemies of Christ. Now think about that for a moment. I mean, in 2000, what are we in? I started to say 17. We're in 18, right? 2018, if you're an enemy of Christ, if you're an atheist enemy of Christ, there's lots of hobbies in America that you can get into. What if you're one of these guys, in 1776, you're an atheist enemy of Christ? What do you do in your spare time? Let's find out what these atheist enemies of Christ, this guy right here in the corner, that's the Reverend Dr. John Witherspoon. Yeah, that's a pastor in Congress. 29 of the 56 held what we would call today a seminary degree. That's pretty good to get a bunch of atheists to go to seminary. Nothing else to do. I'm sure they were just doing opposition research on this Jesus guy. I'm sure that's all that was going on. They couldn't have possibly believed. Witherspoon, by the way, responsible for 2 American translations of the Bible. He's the Billy Graham of that day. His sermons were shared all over the country, trained many of the founding fathers. No question about Witherspoon. Here we have Secretary Thompson. He's responsible for the Thompson Bible. You still get it today. He spent 25 years of his life translating the Greek Septuagint into English. Benjamin Rush here started the first Bible society in America, known as the Philadelphia Bible Society. Within a few years, these guys had dozens of Bible societies, spreading the Word of God, studying the Word of God. Interesting activity for atheists, but they were weird back then. I don't know what to tell you. But Rush also started the first Abolition Society in America. He and Ben Franklin. When I went to law school, these guys, I was told they were all slave owners. They were all racist. I can tell you now today, 3/4 of the men you're looking at were abolitionists. In fact, Rush and Franklin said that's why they wanted independence. We'd abolished slavery in 3 states before we declared independence. King George vetoes all 3, says you guys are keeping slavery whether you want it or not. They said it's one of the main reasons we wanted our independence. And in fact, I shared with the students this morning, it wasn't just a bunch of rich white guys that started this thing and actually got our freedom for us. One of the guys I told them about was this fellow right here, Peter Salem. 13 military commendations in one day right there at Bunker Hill. He was the hero there at Bunker Hill. Black patriot most people don't know about. These 2 guys in the front of the boat, you always see the boat of Washington crossing the Delaware. These are actually 2 black patriots that fought side by side with Washington through most of the war, Oliver Cromwell and Prince Whipple. In fact, Prince Whipple secured his freedom before they crossed and had that great victory on Christmas night. My favorite of all, I told them today at school, was this guy right here, James Armistead. He's actually a double agent for Lafayette. Lafayette knew that we couldn't win. We were losing, every battle in the beginning. He said, we got to have a good intelligence network. We got to have some spies. But if you were a spy early in the war, man, you were a hired gun. He said, we need some people that we can trust. And so Armistead and Lafayette cooked up a plan. Armistead being black, and he could convince the British that he was a runaway slave and that he wanted to defeat the Americans. So Lafayette and he cooked up this plan where he could sneak into the British camp, say, please let me be a part of your team. I want to join you guys. And he did, and he was able to fool them, and he worked his way up to some of the highest echelons in the British camp. And while he's there, he's spying, he's getting all this great information, and he's sneaking out and getting it to Lafayette. And all of a sudden, we start winning some battles because of this information. So the British are going, man, these Americans are getting smart. We need some spies. Who do we know that could get... Hey, Armistead, you'd be really good at this. Would you be willing? No way, man, don't send me back to those Americans. No, we really need you to go. No, I'm not going back. I hate those guys. No, we really need... All right, I guess I could do that for you. So now we got this double agent. I call him the James Bond of the Revolutionary War. And Armistead now has free passage from the British. He's able to go give all the information to Lafayette and the Americans that he could get. And then he goes back and he's able to give a disinformation campaign to the British and set them up. He practically sets up Yorktown for us and ends the war long before it would have happened otherwise. So there's just all kinds of cool stories like that we have lost in our history. So don't think, I don't care what color your skin is, I don't care where you're from, don't think you don't have ownership in the American dream and in this system of freedom. It is meant for every single one of us. Don't buy the lies that are being told to many of the people in our country right now. Go seek out these stories. They're fun. But let me get back to the issue of whether or not we ought to have truth and a creator in the equation, and whether these guys were all atheists. Again, I don't have time to do 247 guys. I can tell you that of the 247, there are 10 guys that were not Christians, okay, out of 247. So that's about 5%. So I got the other 95% outspoken Christians, lived it, talked it, wrote it, spoke it. There's no denying it. 10 of them that I got to take off the table and say they weren't Christians. Now, they weren't atheists. They weren't agnostics. They weren't deists. They believed in the hand of providence. They believed God was involved in our daily lives. That's not a deist by any stretch of the imagination, but they weren't Christians. So let me just give you one of them as my final example. This is Ben Franklin, one of the least religious of the founding fathers. Now, Franklin at the Constitutional Convention is 81 years old. Now, I used to think 81 was old. It's getting younger and younger, all right? And I was actually with a congressman a few years back, and he was introducing me. He spoke, and then he was introducing me, and I was still pretty young at the time. And he looks over at me, and he goes, Rick, he said, he was 81. He said, you probably think I'm old because I'm 81. But he said, let me tell you something. I went to Senator Strom Thurmond's 100-year birthday party. And he said, Thurmond looked over at me, and he says, oh, to be 80 again. So 80 is young, all right, today. Back then, not so. Average lifespan back then, 34, 35. I mean, he's the elder statesman, Franklin is. So everybody listens when he speaks. So here he is at the convention. The moment in time I want to take you back to in our little time machine here is about 5 weeks into the Constitutional Convention. People are literally leaving the convention. They've decided it's not going to happen. We will not reach agreement on slavery, on representation in Congress, on all these different issues. And so Franklin gets up, and here's how he saves the day. He notices that here we are only 11 years after the Declaration of Independence, only 4 years after the peace treaty, and we already need a history lesson. So he proceeds to give the guys in the room a history lesson. He says, in the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Now, Franklin, like Wilson, can say, in the beginning, we had prayer in this room because he's one of those six. He's one that was at both the Declaration and the Constitution. So he reminds them. He says, our prayers were heard and they were graciously answered. All of us engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. And then he asked the question that we need to ask in America today. Have we now forgotten this powerful friend? Do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? I've lived for a long time. The longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. You know this part. In fact, we talked about it at lunch today. If a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We've been assured in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, that except the Lord, wait, I missed that. Yeah, I also believe without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven be held in this assembly only once and in private, because if the ACLU finds out, they'll sue us and we'll all be in. No, did I get that wrong? Oh, no, wait, he said every morning before we proceed to business. Now, why would he do that? But he knows we cannot succeed as a nation without that religious element, without God in the equation. He even he quoted about 14 Bible verses. I'm just giving you a small part of it. He said we need to be illuminated by the Father of lights. We need God in the equation if we're going to succeed. You see, we used to be what Romans refers to. There was a time when we acknowledged God, we knew God, And now we've changed it. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. That's what's changed. There was a time when we did do that, and now we've decided we don't think it's worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God. Our Supreme Court has said you can't even do that. Can't even put the 10 Commandments on the wall in a school anymore. It started in 62 with that case called Engel v. Vitale, no more voluntary prayer in schools. Next year they said no more Bible in schools. It's called Abington v. Shemp, Murray v. Collette. And then a few years later, you can't pray at a football game. You can't have the Pledge of Allegiance because it has under God in the pledge. You can't even, like I said, have the 10 Commandments. And now we've gotten to this point where we're arresting pastors for praying on a sidewalk. We're putting people out of business because they don't want to participate in something and use their art and their skill in something that violates their very conscience. The case where they said no 10 Commandments was called Stone v. Graham. And the United States Supreme Court said if you put the 10 Commandments on a wall in a school, they said that the kids might see them. If they see them, they might read them. And if they read them, they might study them. And if they study them, they might obey them. And that would violate the Establishment Clause. Let's see. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Kind of sounds like some pretty good things to be teaching. But we said, no, wait. That would be offensive. I mean, to get up and say there's a right and wrong and to tell you not to lie and not to kill would be, I mean, I shouldn't take a position on something like that as a teacher. So we say, no more right and wrong, do whatever feels good. Oh, by the way, the students sitting next to you in class, they're just randomly gathered protoplasm, just a pile of atoms, not a child of God, not a created being. So you do whatever feels good to you. You do whatever's right in your own eyes. And then we get Paducah, Pearl, Jonesboro, Littleton, the list goes on and on and on. It happens about every 3 months in America now. And you don't hear much about it unless it's 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 students that get killed, where a student has been willing to walk into a classroom, take out a gun, and murder a classmate. We put the formula in place that produces that kind of result. And I know we're in New Jersey and everybody loves to blame the guns. Friends, if I had it with me, which I normally do, I could take out my 6C 345 1911 and I could put it right up here and we could all stand around it. And we could hold hands and chant the rest of the night. It will not jump up and shoot anybody. The gun is not the problem. What's the problem? The heart of man. We're the problem. You take away the guns, we'll use knives. We got the mayor of London now calling for knife control. That's not a joke. That's really happening. On the very same day of Sandy Hook, when the crazy guy goes in and kills a bunch of teachers and kids, crazy guy in China goes in with a sword and a knife and does the exact same thing. The terrorist weapon of choice today is a Mack truck. It's not about the weapon. It's not about the inanimate object. It's about the heart of man. And Jefferson warned us about it. He said, can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we remove their only firm basis? And this is the one thing I hope you remember. A conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God. Thomas Jefferson is telling us the firm basis of liberty, the part of the formula that will produce liberty, the part you can't lose, is a conviction in the minds of our people that these liberties do not come from our neighbor who could take them away. These liberties do not come from government who could take them away. These liberties come from God. It makes us act differently. It causes us to live differently, to treat our neighbor in a different way. He said, indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and justice cannot sleep forever. His justice cannot sleep forever. Folks, we got to get it back to the point where we say, thank you, God, for the freedom that we have. I'm going to live my freedom respecting the authority of God. That's how you get a nation that has good results. And it comes back to our education system. Benjamin Rush was one of the signers, the Declaration, incredible medical doctor, trained about 2,000 doctors. I mean, just incredible story, Renaissance man, started all kinds of schools and all kinds of different things. He's really considered the father of our public school system under the Constitution. And he told us we should have the Bible in schools, teaching it as the primary textbook in schools, because the more we teach the Bible in schools, the less we'll have to punish crime later because we prevent it in the first place. That's why the Northwest Ordinance said in all of our schools we would teach religion, morality, and knowledge. Knowledge was third because we needed religion and morality first so you knew what to do with that knowledge. That's why, just like you said today at lunch, it was almost like you had already gone through my slides. You said, you quoted that scripture. I mean, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The founders said that over and over and over again. In fact, Rush warned us. He said, without religion, I believe learning does real mischief to the morals and principles of mankind. Think about that quote. Without religion, learning does real mischief to the morals and principles of mankind. I believe that where there is the most knowledge in those countries, there is the most Christianity. In other words, if we have Christianity at the base of our education system, we get good results. When we remove religion and morality and only go straight to knowledge, we get terrible results. Since '62, when we made that decision to take God out of our schools, we've seen our literacy rate go from being the #1 country on the planet to number 68. 700,000 kids, this was 3 years ago, graduated from our schools and couldn't read their diplomas. And the international testing, our elementary school kids are above average, our junior high average, our high school below average. That's going the wrong direction, wouldn't you say? In fact, the American School Board Journal says that the longer U.S. students stay in school, the less they seem to know. That's not a good trend, right? But it's because of the formula. You're going to get the effect from whatever cause you put in place. So last quote I'll share with you from if I can read this here. At many of the most prestigious colleges in the United States, seniors know less than freshmen about America's history, government, foreign affairs, and economy, a phenomenon known as negative learning. So the longer they're there, the less they know about these most important things. All right, so what's the solution? Aren't you glad you came tonight so I could depress you? It's not really. In fact, I was telling them earlier today, I usually try to offend everybody in the room before I'm done, because we've bought this idea that the Declaration says life, liberty, and to never be offended. So I just like to offend people so they know that's part of freedom. So if I step on your toes tonight, I apologize. My intent is to stomp on them, all right? But how do we turn this thing around? Charles Finney told us. Now, Finney was a speaker in the Second Great Awakening. He actually came to know the Lord by reading his law books, and Blackstone and others that were quoting scripture and talking about the Lord. This is not John Travolta, in case anybody's confused about the slide I've given you. It's actually Finney in the Second Great Awakening. He put it this way, he said the church, so here we are, this is your challenge, all right? The church must take right ground in regard to politics. Politics are part of a religion in a country such as this, and Christians must do their duty to their country as a part of their duty to God. God will bless or curse this nation according to the course Christians take in politics. Now you may say, well, Rick, you're not here to talk about politics. Well, what is politics? Politics is the influence in the culture. It's the direction that the culture is going to go. Where does that begin? Lincoln told us the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. So what you are doing at Timothy is you are training a philosophy in the classroom that will be the government of the next generation. And I firmly believe, from what I've seen here, just today, being with your students, going through the campus, seeing the things that you're investing in, even just watching that video right there, there's no doubt in my mind you are raising the leaders of the next generation. And so what you're doing in the classroom here is not going to just affect the people in this gymnasium. It's going to affect all the students and the families outside this gymnasium in this community, because you're raising the leaders of industry and business and media and education and the pulpit and all these different areas. And if they get the foundation in these classrooms the way that you're doing it, they're going to take that foundation into the culture and bring the culture back to the very things that made the nation great in the first place. So the formula hasn't changed. What produces a great nation has not changed. We've run from the formula for a couple of decades now, and we've actually been moving away from it really for 2 generations. But we can come back to it. All is not lost. Don't be like some of my friends back in Texas. Rick, it's all over. Grab your guns and canned food and go hide out at the ranch. Like, man, it's like they got this black cloud follows them around. It's like they drink milk out of a churn, weaned on a pickle. I mean, they're just depressing people. You don't have to be like that. I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt, and I get to cheat a little bit because I get to see the fruit of your labor in the arena of legislative sessions or in business and all these different areas. I get to see these kids that you have taught these values to, passionate, articulate leaders that are influencing their generation and winning over their generation. So maybe I have a little bit more hope than some. You might have a microcosm, and sometimes you think, man, can we really turn this thing around? Absolutely, yes, we can turn this thing around. And here's my challenge to you. I know I'm supposed to be done by now, so I'm circling. It doesn't mean I'm landing. It means I could land at any time. So be ready. All right, so here we go. Here's the 3 things I'm going to ask you to do. Same thing the founders did. All right, so if you go back to when they signed the Declaration of Independence, not on July 4th. I know we always mess that up in our history. It's actually August 2nd. So on August 2nd, when they gathered to actually put their name on the document, they knew it was a death sentence. Benjamin Rush and John Adams exchanged letters later. So remember what it was like to gather in that room in total silence and sign the Declaration when we believed it would be our death sentence. And in fact, he retells the story of how they'd come one by one, and Secretary Thompson would call them forward in total silence. He'd say, John Hart, New Jersey. And Hart would get up, come forward, take the pen, dip it in the ink. You could hear it scratching along the surface of the Declaration of Independence. When he called Elbridge Gerry forward, Elbridge Gerry came forward, he took the pen, he dipped it in the ink, he was just about to sign, and Jerry's a little guy. He's not the towering 7-foot Thor-like figure that stands before you speaking. What are y'all laughing at? Oh, okay. So yeah, anyway, he's actually, I'm small, but he's even shorter than me, all right? And Jerry's like, they used to make fun of him because he was so little. And so he's up there and he's about to sign, and this big guy in the back of the room, largest of the founders, Colonel Benjamin Harrison. I mean, he was huge. Could have been a middle linebacker for he wasn't big enough for the Cowboys, maybe played for the Jets, but I mean, he wasn't big enough for the Cowboys. But anyway, so he's in the back of the room and he hollers out and he breaks the silence of this most important political moment in the history of the world. He says, "I shall have a great advantage over you, Mr. Gerry, when we're hung for what we're now doing. By the size and great weight of my body, well, I'll be dead within a minute or two. By the lightness of yours, you're going to dance in the air for an hour or more before you're finally dead." True story. Only words spoken near the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Now, I tell you that because I think it's funny, but I also tell you that because it tells you they knew. They knew it was a death sentence. They knew, this is it, man. We put our name on the dotted line. It's over if King George finds us. And yet they were willing to come forward, take the pen, dip it in the ink, and sign beneath that amazing final sentence. It says, "In support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." They gave it all. They didn't just get excited and sign a petition at a rally. They followed through on that commitment. Every penny that they had, some of them. 9 of them didn't survive to enjoy the freedom that we enjoy. Sacred honor, the willingness to stand up and speak truth no matter what it cost you. So the challenge for you guys is to do exactly what they did. Give your life. That's your time. The willingness to invest. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir. Every one of you have been doing that. You've been investing in your time. So many people serving tonight and now all throughout the day saw people giving of their time at lunch and everywhere else to invest in the next generation. Your life is your time. Take time to study the Constitution, to study freedom, and to teach it to these kids. We take you into Independence Hall to do that. Teach it in the room where it's actually framed in David Barton's library and pull all those cool documents off the shelf. Get that course and study it with your family and with your neighbors. So life. Also, by the way, you got it a lot easier than the Founding Fathers. I mean, you can study candidates, you can take voters' guides into the booth with you, you can use your own committee of correspondence with Twitter and Facebook and spread the word. Listen to our radio program, we'll equip you and encourage you. We're very optimistic. We're more, we really believe God's doing some great things in the country and you can be a part of that. So your time. Also, actively pass the torch to the next generation. Learn more about Patriot Academy. I would love to see 20 students from Timothy come over to Dover and be a part of Patriot Academy when we do the Northeast Academy in July. You can help make that happen and be a part of Patriot Academy. But the investment of your life, your fortune, yes, your money, and your sacred honor is what I'm asking you to do. And the investment into this school, into the next generation of young people is going to pay off more than anything you can put your money into on the stock market or anywhere else. You are literally investing in restoring America's Constitution. That's how important what they do every day in the classroom is. You have no idea what God's going to do with these young people as they graduate. The foundation that you're sending them out of this school with, I believe God's going to use literally, I'm not exaggerating here, to save our country. Now, you may say this is cheesy or an exaggeration. My wife says I get cheesy. She calls me the king of Velveeta sometimes, but I truly believe this. The fate of the free world depends on what you do right here in this community. Now, if you think that's an exaggeration, follow my logic. How many of you would agree with me the fate of the free world still depends on America? Whether we like it or not, it's still dependent upon us. How many of you would agree, in all seriousness, that the fate of America depends upon a restoration of those constitutional principles that produce freedom? Would you agree with me on that tonight? Now, how many of you would agree that restoring those constitutional principles and the foundation of America depends upon the first 3 words of the document, we the people? Would you agree that if it's going to happen, it's up to us, we the people? All right, folks, follow the logic. If the fate of the free world depends on America, if America depends on our constitutional principles being restored, if our constitutional principles being restored depends on we the people, the fate of the free world depends on you. It depends on me. It depends on us doing at Timothy what you've been doing, I can't believe this, since 1949. It's phenomenal. We desperately need you. I'm telling you, Texas, I can't believe I'm going to say this, Texas is dependent on you. If anybody uses that recording and ever plays it anywhere back home in Texas, I'm going to find you. I'll hunt you down, man. You better burn that off. But I'm dead serious. We're in this together. We're dependent on you. You're dependent on us. Please be willing to give of your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor. There's no better investment you can make. And I'm going to tell one last story. I'm going to sit down. You can get up here and take up the offering. But here's the truth about what you're going to do tonight when you donate to Timothy and what you've already done, and some of you do this year round, and the things that you're investing in. When I say there's no better investment, like I said, I get to see the result. If you don't do this, I truly believe our country is at the precipice. We have to raise up a remnant. We have to raise up a remnant that is founded in Christian principles and that will take those out and be true salt and light. If the salt has lost its flavor, what good is it? If we're not willing to take the light out there into the community, we have truth on our side. We know from history what this formula can produce when we restore it. What you're doing is so important. To all you teachers and administrators, thank you for investing in the next generation, for giving of your lives. And you do, just like you were saying, you work for less, you work long hours, you invest in these kids. It's absolutely essential. I believe, and this is what I'll close with, I believe we're very much like these guys right here. Happened actually yesterday was the anniversary of the shot heard around the world. And I believe we're at that point, just like that little ragtag bunch of about 70 guys that lined up on the Lexington Green on April 19th, 1775. A couple years ago, we went and actually watched, our kids marched with some of the Minutemen, and we got to participate in the reenactment. And I told the story for years, but to stand on the Lexington Green and watch those Minutemen line up, that small little ragtag bunch, and then to look to my right and see this massive horde of red and the 800 British infantry coming over the hill. 800 to about 70, outnumbered, more than 11 to 1. And Captain Parker walks up and down that line of those Minutemen, and he looks at them, he says, "Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have war, let it begin here." And then that shot heard around the world was fired. That's where your freedom and my freedom began. And I'm here to tell you, if it's going to survive another generation, it's got to begin right here. Thank you guys for accepting the torch of freedom and purposely passing it to the next generation. God bless you.